coronavirus vaccination will probably turn out to be like influenza. You'll probably get a booster every year. So we think we're in line to make the best vaccine. We're not going to be the fastest vaccine.
From Grindstone Media, this is Nebraska Made, a narrative journey through the lives of Nebraska's most inspiring business leaders. We unpack the intimate details of how our guests navigated obstacles and built their companies in pursuit of the good life. I'm JT Martin, and today we hear from the CEO and president of Adjuvance Technologies, a company developing the next generation of COVID vaccines right here in Lincoln. And this story is especially personal to me because Tyler is actually my dad. Adjuvance Technologies is a vaccine research company that made waves in the Lincoln biotech startup community earlier this year when it announced that it had raised a $20 million Series A round of funding, reportedly the largest Series A round ever in the history of Nebraska. And their CEO, Tyler Martin, has an unlikely story, having come from a humble small town in Nebraska.
I grew up in Hebron, Nebraska, about 90 miles south and west of Lincoln. I grew up as a sports fanatic, not a business fanatic. So if we weren't in school, we were playing baseball or football or basketball, whatever the sports season was, that's what we did. My dad, in addition to being the basketball coach, taught chemistry and physics. So from an early age, I was doing chemistry experiments with him and watching him do experiments or set up experiments that the students would do the next day. So I became very interested in science at an early age, and as a result of that, was very interested in mathematics.
Because going from, your parents being, high school teachers, it was probably a big jump and a big ambition to go off and go to medical school. Yeah, it was not the traditional path of our family members up to that point in time. And then the next really important fork in the road for me was when I was in my last year of medical school. Your mother and I went to work in what then was Zaire, now the Congo. So we were at a missionary hospital out in the middle of the rainforest, and it was there that I really got a vision for how being trained in infectious disease can be helpful on a large population basis. Our pediatric ward had 30 beds in it, and it was just a big open room with 30 beds, so 15 on each side of the room. And it was not uncommon to have a child die every day, sometimes more than one child. So I was very impressed about the enormous burden that infectious diseases put on populations, especially populations in the developing world, and was interested to engage and try to help address those kinds of problems. So the year is 1986, and Tyler has been greatly impacted by his experiences working in the Children's Hospital in Africa. In the village they were in, 50% of children died before they reached the age of 5, mostly from malaria and streptococcus pneumonia. Okay, so you're around, real suffering in Zaire. What do you do when you get back?
Well, so I was still in my training days, so I came back and I did my residency in pediatrics, which was influenced again by our time there and wanting to help with infectious disease that impacted kids. And I then did a postdoc in molecular microbiology and infectious disease at WashU in St. Louis. And then my mentor from WashU had moved out to a company called Chiron. So Chiron was a very exciting place in those early days, and I was attracted by the ability to develop new drugs that would change the world. So we picked up here when you were first grade, if I remember right, picked up our stakes in Nebraska and moved out to the San Francisco Bay Area and stayed out there for 20 years.
Do you remember the night that you decided that you were going to move out? Was there a straw that broke the camel's back?
Yeah, I do remember. It was the weekend I went out there to interview, and I was interviewing with my mentor. When I went out there, I really went out there just to be polite to him. But we were sitting there having dinner, and we were talking about some new things he'd learned about the immune system in the last couple of years. And I just felt like, and I hadn't been exposed to that level of molecular biology in the intervening time. And I just felt like, this is who I am, to live in this space and think about these ideas and to take a scientific discovery and then think about how can I exploit that discovery into things that would help people. So we had dinner. I went to the airport to fly back to Nebraska, and I called your mom from the airport and said, "Honey, this is serious. We got to think about this." and in 30 days, we decided to move.
So Tyler decided to move his wife and family of 4 young children to Silicon Valley to work on new cures for diseases, because in the 90s, there just wasn't the same amount of innovation happening in Nebraska. Back then, there was an R&D lab that is now Zoetis, and there was a little bit of animal health research, but none of the medical device or diagnostic companies that exist here now today. So Tyler took his fancy postdoc degree with him to California to learn how to talk the talk of a research physician.
Most biotech companies include 2 people as the leaders. There's the money guy and the technical guy. So in the early days, I was the technical guy. So I would go with the financial guy to meet with the VCs, pitch our idea, help explain it. And when they would have questions about, well, what about this gene, or what about this protein, or what about this cell, I was the guy that answered those questions. So by accompanying the CEO on those sorts of visits, that's how I learned how to handle the business side of the biotech business. So I grew up as a technical guy, and now I'm a business guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when did that role flip for you?
Yeah, it really flipped at the last company I was at in the Bay Area called Dynavax. So Dynavax is another vaccine company very similar to Adjuvance, and I became president of that company and while I was there. So I started off as chief medical officer and then became president of the company.
So, back in 2012, did I get that right?
Yep.
Back in around 2012, Dynavax had a ton of press around it, a ton of hype. It was around this round of funding that it had gotten, and investors were kind of clamoring to get in. What was going on there? How did that come about?
So the product was an improved vaccine for hepatitis B called Heplisav. It was a pretty negative situation when I joined. We had 90 days of cash in the bank. We were burning probably about $30 million a year at that point. And so we raised that money, got our product back into development, and it became quite as you said, there was quite a bit of buzz around it. So in 2012, when we were coming back to the FDA for now approval of our vaccine after we'd completed this new work.
You completed the clinical trials on it?
Yeah, completed the phase 3 clinical trials and submitted the application to the FDA. We were featured on Mad Money as an example. And it was kind of a heady moment.
You were sort of a rock star of biotech in Silicon Valley at the time. And
in 2009, when I joined the company, publicly traded company, our market cap was $25 million. As we were heading into this FDA meeting in November of 2012, our market cap was $1 billion. So investors had done well during that time, and it was we thought there was a really attractive path forward.
So at this point, Dynavax is now a $1 billion company, and all signs were pointing towards their drug receiving FDA approval and being able to reap the benefits of going to market. Well, the FDA even published a position statement concluding that their drug should be approved. It seemed like they had it in the bag. Now, the FDA is the gatekeeper for all things related to health in the United States, but they've come under scrutiny in the past for being inconsistent and showing favoritism towards big pharma companies. The FDA approved just 48 drugs in 2019, so nothing is ever guaranteed when applying for approval. The future of Dynavax hinged on one final FDA approval meeting on November 12th, 2012.
Unfortunately, when we went to this FDA meeting, the vote on our vaccine, they vote on 2 different things. One is it effective? And the second, is it safe? And so the vote on effectiveness was 13-1, and the vote on safety was 5-7.
Is there any chance of redoing the trial to make it better?
Yeah, there is, but redoing the trial was a $50 million exercise and would take 3 years.
What did you do the moment that you found out that the vote flipped on you?
Yeah, so it was a really depressing day. We were as an emerging biotech. At that point, the company was 15 years old. This was our first product that was ever going to the FDA for review. My team had worked really hard. We had 200 people in the company. About 180 of them had worked on this project. We'd worked hard to get this in, and people had poured their hearts out get this thing in. So it was heartbreaking to lose.
So 15 years of work later, and it all came crashing down. Dynavax had submitted a 135,000-page FDA application, and it had essentially gone up in flames, and their valuation went to basically nothing overnight. It's thought that some of the competitors of Dynavax maybe out-lobbied them with FDA advisors, and the narrative turned against them, but regardless of what happened, Tyler found himself starting all over again. So how do you get back to Nebraska at this point?
Well, so I was helped by the fact that the new CEO didn't want the former president to be around, but I had come to the conclusion that because of the talent that was available here
in Nebraska,
yes, that was available in Nebraska, and the fact that the cost structure to operate here is lower than it is in San Francisco, and the fact that I had these investor relationships that I helped have a successful investment outcome going from 25 million to $1 billion, that I could attract investment here and I could start a company here. So that's why we decided to come back. After about a year being here and doing consulting gigs for people and just kind of trying to figure out what was next, a group of founders from Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York called me and said they had an adjuvant. Would I be interested to run the company? So I looked at their adjuvant and it seemed like a really interesting idea to me. So I called them. I said, I'd be really interested to run the company, but I want to run it in Lincoln for all the reasons I just said, because the cost of operations is low. We can get people here. We've got good technical people here. So let's build it here. So they agreed. So we moved the company from New York to here.
How did that Series A round come about? Were you just kind of in the right place at the right time, or how did that work?
Yeah. Well, we'd spent a lot of time over the years developing relationships with investors, but the truth is that the way we found the investor that pulled the trigger on the Series A round, it was a single investor that put $20 million into the company, was a former colleague of mine who was my boss at Chiron, had worked with this group. They'd had 2 successful engagements with him where his companies had done well. So he made the introduction, and within about a week from the introduction, he sent the email on Monday. I met with them in Boston on Friday, and the deal was on. It took us 60 days to close. So five years of struggle, 1 week of courting, 60 days to close.
Is this the biggest Series A round ever in the history of Nebraska?
That's what I'm told. I'm not an expert in that, but that's what my friends here tell me, is that this is the largest Series A round. And while there's one sense in which we take pride in that, and we want to put Nebraska on the map, that you can get us 20 million Series A round in Nebraska, the truth is it's really a reflection of the industry that we're in. So that's kind of a normal life science company Series A round. We're about ready to do our first clinical trial, and that clinical trial is probably going to cost about $5 million. So that's the first experiment you're going to do in a human costs $5 million, and it costs about $10 million to get to that experiment. So it's just not the kind of thing that you can do, off
your savings.
Yeah. Well, at least not off my savings.
So your company is called Adjuvance Technologies. Mm-hmm. Tell me what an adjuvant is and where it comes from.
Yep. So an adjuvant is a drug or a compound that you add to a vaccine to further stimulate the immune response to that vaccine. So it's kind of like a booster. And they come from all sorts of different places. Our particular adjuvant is an extract of the bark of a tree that's called Quiaja saponaria. This tree only grows in a certain region of Chile, and saponins are kind of soapy molecules that work as adjuvants. And this tree was identified because it has so much saponin in its bark that when it rains, suds form at the base of this tree. So that made people say, we should go look at this tree and see if we take the bark off and put it in some methanol and then put that methanol in, does that do anything good? And it does. What our material is we synthesize the same material, and because we synthesize it, we could then make improved versions of it. We could change the structure, make better versions. So our preferred version is called 1055, and it's better for 2 reasons. First, on the supply side, we start our manufacturing process with just the core of the molecule. And that core is present in all parts of the tree. So leaves, shoots, little branches. So we can essentially prune the tree like a rose bush to get our starting material. As a result,
killing it.
Yes, without killing it. So it's a sustainable harvest. And as a result, we could make up to 100 billion doses per year without having to plant another tree. We can just trim the current trees.
So Adjuvance has found what they believe to be a never-ending supply of these adjuvants. Once all of the trees die off from being terminally harvested by the other adjuvants companies that they compete with, Tyler would essentially have a monopoly on all of this particular compound. Sounds like a really useful discovery during a global pandemic. Wow, so you're figuring out a way to sustainably harvest this molecule from this rare tree in Chile, and then COVID hits.
Yeah.
What happens?
Well, it actually hasn't been super disruptive to us. We've gotten a little bit of money from the NIH to look at the use of our adjuvant with COVID vaccines. We don't have any deals with any other companies to advance those programs yet. We have some really interesting data. We have shown that we can enhance the immune response to COVID vaccines. So it hasn't really had a negative impact on us, but it has allowed some of our competitors to really do quite well. So again, Novavax, which I mentioned before, is a competitor of ours. They received $1.6 billion from BARDA, another $400 million from governments in Europe. So they've received $2 billion in non-dilutive funding to work on COVID. Now they're right in the middle of the front of the pack to develop a COVID vaccine. So good for them. I wish we would have been in the front, but we weren't ready when the time came, and so we're working on how do we make the next generation COVID vaccine.
You essentially make a better adjuvant than this company that got this $2 billion in funding, though, correct? So for the next generation of COVID vaccine, which the first generation will probably be for elderly and people with high risk, you're sort of going to be in line to help all of the kind of secondary people, maybe middle-aged people, people who are a little bit healthier but still need to get the vaccine.
Yeah. Our feeling based on the immunology of other coronaviruses is that this is not really going to go away. That is, coronavirus vaccination will probably turn out to be like influenza. You'll probably get a booster every year. So while today we're looking at how quickly can we get anything that provides immunity to anybody, eventually we're going to want to have the best vaccine. So we think we're in line to make the best vaccine. We're not going to be the fastest vaccine, but we think we can be the best.
What about starting adjuvants in Nebraska specifically do you think has really helped?
Yeah, there's two critical variables. One is there was good technical talent in the area already, so I knew I could acquire talent that we needed to run the company. And the second was low cost of operation, so our money would last longer here than it would on the coast. Just as an example of that, I'd explained to the investor that it would be much cheaper here. And when they looked at the lease, they said, good grief, $60,000 a month? I can get you space in Boston for $60,000 a month. I said, it's $60,000 a year. They said, oh, sign the lease.
Adjuvant's test results are continuing to show signs of promise, and they'll continue to grow the biotech industry right here in Nebraska. Tyler says that he hopes that their efforts will create a hub of technical talent that will lead to more research companies popping up all around the state in years to come. I'm JT Martin, and this has been a Grindstone production. Grindstone is one of the premier production and marketing firms here in Lincoln, offering everything you need to grow your business in 2020, from video and podcast production to social media management and media buying. You can learn more by visiting grindstoneagency.com. Who's your favorite child?
My favorite child is probably Janae.
Janae, the youngest? Those youngest kids, so spoiled.
I couldn't say you.
No, you could.